As I mentioned in a recent LinkedIn post, the stories of the office demise have been greatly exaggerated. Despite perception issues and some headlines dominating the news cycles, offices are alive and well, exactly as the video you just saw illustrated. Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Lorenzo Papa, the CRO here at Captivate, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our latest webinar, The Office Return: Who, When, and Why. In a moment, I'll be joined by our CMO, Scott Martin, and special guest, Stefan Martinovic, the VP of Data and Partnerships at Placer.ai. Over the last year and a half, we've expanded our offering to capture people and places of influence, delivering advertisers elusive, high-value audiences in multiple captive environments where they work, live, and play. With that said, work, as it has been for the last 25 years, will continue to anchor our platform. Hence the focus of today's discussion, return to office. At Captivate, we've been transparent about the impact of COVID-19 on traffic levels across our office inventory. As noted in previous engagements, office buildings are essential, and even at the height of the crisis, every single one of our venues were 100% open with traffic flowing daily. With vaccination rates continually climbing and infection rates dropping in key markets, we've seen tremendous growth across our top DMAs in 2021, amplified further by school reopenings just last month. Admittedly, we're not quite yet back to pre-pandemic levels, but as of last week, we saw a 68% improvement in traffic over this same point in time last year, which translates to 5.8 million unique viewers on a weekly basis that are back in our footprint today. That is still significant scale when benchmarking against other media channels that reach a Captivate-like audience, the affluent consumer and business decision maker. Furthermore, the audience we engage today is no less valuable than they were prior to the pandemic. They are still gainfully employed, have disposable income, and are responsible for making all important business decisions. One could argue they are perhaps even more valuable now, given there are very few alternative opportunities to influence their consumption habits and purchasing decisions that are more timely or as contextually relevant as Captivate. During today's webinar, we'll be covering the latest news on return to office and the decision-making process businesses are following to safely return employees back to work, the hybrid work model and the attitudes of professionals remaining at home versus returning to the office, and how Captivate is using data to accurately capture the growing traffic in our venues, and how we're making that data actionable for our partners to smartly plan and activate campaigns, not just at the network or market level, but down to the individual venue level. We encourage active participation during our program today. So if you do have a question, we invite you to put it into the chat window. At the conclusion of the presentation, we'll try to answer as many questions as possible. If we do run out of time, someone from our team will follow up with you directly. At this time, please welcome Captivate CMO, Mr. Scott Martin.
Hey, thanks so much, Lorenzo, and thanks all of you for being here. It's an exciting day at Captivate as we look at people returning to the office and some of the major decisions that corporations are faced with. Let's start by looking at that decision-making process and the return to the office. First and foremost, in many major cities, employers are looking at vaccination rates. Vaccination rates in their cities, their towns, are looking at the vaccination rates of their employees, even their customers. Captivate's fortunate because many of our markets are in markets with extremely high vaccination rates. The top 3 markets are well above the average. Another factor being weighed is the national mandate for certain companies based on their size. Companies are weighing and comparing their own policies to adhere to the government's policy, which carries fines as much as $14,000 or more. I know one thing that the mandate did, it influenced a few million people to get the vaccine over the last month or so, and that's certainly helping things get reopened. The majority of white-collar professionals agree with the mandate, with the numbers here on the slide, 68% and 70%. The reason they like it is because it gives them a feeling of safety and security. Employers want to keep their employees safe, and really that's all they can do right now. We know that companies and their mandates will have a lot to do with the rebound that we're starting to see in the commercial real estate industry. In fact, we've been watching it for a few months, and leasing activity is up 29%. When I look around at the commercial office occupancy and vacancies, it really topped out around 85% were occupied and 15% were empty or vacant. And that means that there's about, the worst case scenario at any given point, about 15% of companies that were not going to return to work. So that's really not as bad as people thought out in the street. And I want to make that crystal clear. The actual commercial real estate industry is doing well in terms of contracts with their tenants. Companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon, they're all actually expanding their footprints in the commercial real estate market. But no matter what, we know that the return to the office will take some twists and turns, and that's why we feel it's our duty and our responsibility to track, predict, and identify those turns. So in the next section, we're going to take a look at some of these return to office insights. We have great data within Captivate with a third-party managed panel from our partners who spend a lot of time in this space, through one of the vendors that we have on the phone today to talk about mobile location data. And we're going to provide all that information to you today, and hopefully there'll be some great learnings. So let me start by talking about the return to the office. Even at a peak of the pandemic, as I mentioned before, leases were about 85% within the commercial real estate market, which means that only 15% could go fully remote if they wanted to and eliminate their leases. In fact, we haven't seen that at all. So we knew then, we know now, and the employers and employees are coming back to the office. The trick now is to find out where, when, and who's coming back to the office, and really how they're coming back to the office. So I'll cover that in the next section. First, around the time Delta was stalling the return to the office back in July and August, employees spoke out about the delayed return. They hated it. They knew that they needed to get back into the office for productivity, for friendships, for collaboration. In fact, 69% wanted to get back into the office. So there is a desire to get back into the office for sure. And we started to see that in the last month or so, and we'll go through those numbers today. The biggest challenge the real estate industry faced, and the people that serve the industry like Captivate were faced, was the misperception that everybody's working from home. But it's just not true. If you look at this number here, of all the people that are working from home, if you ask them today, how many people do you think are working from home? They'll tell you it's 40% at least. When the true number is on the right, it's 13% across the country are truly working from home. So the difference between perception and reality is absolutely huge, and we need to get over that hump as people need to understand and will understand that people are coming back in droves to the office. Never more so than today. If you go to New York City today and take a look around, you'll see people in the finance industry, technology industry starting to return to the office. In fact, 50,000 new people a day are going into New York City and going to their office. That's 250,000 people per week. It's incredible the return that's happening in major cities like New York with great vaccination rates. Most employees know that the office is better for relationships, team building, task completion, and avoiding distractions. The numbers are all clear. Friendships abound at work. These relationships improve collaboration and innovation and help with mental health and happiness. Over 60% of employees have a work spouse. If you don't know what a work spouse is, that's someone that you confide in, someone you have a really close relationship with, sort of like a spouse, but not the romance involved. They serve an important role for people over the past 2 years, and really now they're just communicating over phone and messages. It's not working out. They need to get back together because they have a lot of impact on people's mental health and well-being. Employees care about productivity, and certainly that's one of the biggest things that's reported on with the folks working from home full-time or even hybrid. It's just not as productive as in the office, and everyone knows it as companies start to get their employees back in the office or mandate their employees back in the office. Work from home employees admit that they aren't getting the team building and networking while at home. You can see here the numbers 40 and 43% respectively. Another aspect of the office helping with mental health is the fact that you get a break or time to watch a show or listen to a podcast on your commute to and from the office. That's one of the most important things is that routine. You certainly get a separation of your work and personal life when you start that routine of going back to work. And we know from psychology and the importance of the routine. There's a man named Jordan Peterson. He's a well-known psychologist. He's on YouTube and TikTok. He speaks to the fact that a person cannot live their life without a routine. Why? Because Without a routine, your circadian rhythm is all messed up. It's just deregulated, and that circadian rhythm regulates your mood and puts you in a bad mood if it's not part of your routine. So if you notice people are cranky, grumpy, it's certainly due to a lack of sleep, but it's also due to a lack of rhythm and routine. And we get back into that routine once we start to get back into the office. So if you care about your employees, certainly helping them with those routines is going to be a big part of your job and really their job to get back in the good mood and in the right mood. When we look at data and the number of companies that have a plan for the routine, the return to the office rather, we see that now in August, entering into September is where companies have really made a giant leap. Specifically, they went from 45%, 57%, and now up to 63% have created guidelines and timelines for their employees to get back to the office, which is great for our business and the commercial real estate business. Businesses are planning a hybrid return to the office. We've certainly heard a lot about that. The ones that are, mandating return are letting people come back part-time for sure, and then they'll work from home the rest of the time. We've seen that increase even more dramatically than the companies that have a plan. It went from 4 to 13 to 65%. So that's an increase of 15 times what it was back in early part of the year. So we know exactly how companies are returning, how many are returning, and we can talk about who's returning in a few more slides. Here are some examples of companies that are already putting in policies and have already started to get back to the work. People like JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, they started back in the summer. In all these cases, at least 50% of the work week is going to be spent in the office. And one thing that's for sure is in all these cases, when the employees come back to the office, they might complain a little bit, or it might be a little bumpy at first. I know one company in particular provided meals to their employees, and of course, the first thing the employees did was complain about the meals. In fact, in my own research, coming back to the office, one of the toughest things to do is find a good meal, because you're used to what you've been doing at home for the last year and a half. It's a great opportunity for advertisers, whether it's restaurants, food delivery, or anyone in the meal services industry, to get in the office and start advertising to these folks. Food trucks outside the office might be a great way to welcome people back to the office. Certainly that's a major component of the return. So think about that, and also think about the conversations that take place in the workplace versus the conversations that take place when you're working from home. There's at least one of these companies that mentioned their intent and reason for going back to the office was because they were finding that simple conversations between their work from home employees took days to complete. When you're an in-person in the office, you can decide something in 5 minutes. If you do it over email, if you know how people can sometimes take a day or two to return an email, it could take 5 days to make a decision that it took 5 minutes in the office. That's not just productivity, that's just good business and getting things done. So these companies are all moving back into the office, and there's a lot of other folks that are doing it now too. Captivate has a third-party managed panel of professionals, and they've been tracked and surveyed over the whole pandemic to understand their return to the office. In August, we saw a huge change in plans. The people working from home was reduced by 26%. The people going back into the office was 113% increase. So we know now's the time. Now, not everyone's going to be in the office by the end of October. Some people might return at the end of the year, but right now is the time that people are returning fast and furious. As kids go back to school, as the vaccination rates go up. And if you've ever watched the new infection rates, which I do in the CDC and across the country, they've now started to head back down. So, they've basically peaked and now they're heading down. And that's when we usually see the office activity increase dramatically. Another perception versus reality example, and probably one of the most important because it's the question I get asked most from people that I work with and the advertisers that want to get in front of these professionals, is does the hybrid return to work mean that the offices are going to be empty on Mondays and Fridays? And the truth is that absolutely not true. They're not going to be empty on Mondays and Fridays at all. When we work with device detections and mobile location companies and look at the Monday detections versus Friday detections, they're actually relatively high. So on this slide, if you look at the left-hand side, this is what the perception is for the return to work, the hybrid return. They think everyone's going to be in midweek, no one's going to be on a Monday. Absolutely, no one's going to be on Friday. And if you look at device detections on the right-hand side, you can see clearly Monday is just as popular as the other days of the week, and Friday's decline or decrease is just a slight 10 to 12% decrease versus the other days a week. So people are going to be spread out across all days of the week, which means if you're working with Captivate to get your message in front of them, every day is just as valuable, minus the 10% on Friday, which may have a lot to do with summer Fridays, and we'll see in the fall if this comes back up a little bit. In terms of who's returning to the office, there's all sorts of folks. One of the first returning types of people that were back in the office were your high income individuals, growth rate of 118%. They've doubled since last year. The next group to return was the professionals that had no kids at home. Obviously, that tells you, the responsibilities are not so much where they have to be home for rides and school, et cetera, homeschooling and remote learning, all that stuff. They were back into the office pretty fast. Third, um, um, you have your decision makers, and these decision makers are typically business decision makers. So, they can't really make their decisions remotely. They got to get into the office, deal with all sorts of collaborators on the decisions. They're not making decisions in a vacuum. They're working with their peers, and they typically like to do it in person. And then finally, last is working parents. They've grown by 22%. Their reasons for returning later, obviously, their vaccinations for their kids, childcare for their kids, et cetera. But they are coming back to the office, and they're coming at a pretty good rate now, 22%. So the next section, we're going to take a look at a nice comparison of people that are working from home versus people that are working from the office. And then we'll also talk about the people that are doing both, the hybrid approach, because we have a big enough sample size to analyze those people. And this is probably the most surprising data we're going to see today. I think it's also the most interesting data. So let's take a look. First, the hybrid professionals are the most stressed out of the three groups. So I can tell you right now, the rest of the slides are going to carry out this story. Hybrid is not all it's cracked up to be. We know that most of the companies that are returning and offering guidelines are offering the hybrid approach. 60, I forget if it was 64, 65% are offering that hybrid approach. But the stress levels are increased for that group. It could be the lack of routine. It could be that they're not quite comfortable quite yet, or it could be that they haven't found the right cadence in terms of when and where to return. But I can tell you this, if you look at their stress levels, it's much higher than the people that are working from the office exclusively and those that are working from the home exclusively. So there's something to be further investigated there, and we'll get into it on some of these slides. Next is those hybrid folks are working the longest hours. Clearly, they're putting in more time. Maybe they're counting their commute time when we survey them and ask them about their working hours, but clearly they're showing up earlier, staying later, whether it's at work or at home. This is something that's probably adding to that stress level that we just saw on the previous slide. So my recommendation is certainly to look at this data in more detail and uncover why the hybrid approach is not necessarily the right way right now. Of course, the office for me is the most productive, most collaborative, and easiest way to get back into the right business and the right swing of things. But we'll see what other data we have here. On the next slide, we're going to know what they're doing when they're working from home, or even the hybrid folks when they're working a couple of days in the office and then going home. It looks like they're doing a lot of personal activity. There's a lot that are spending, hours, or at least an hour, that are doing non-work activity while they're working from home. And, I have tons of experience, certainly in the research side of things and uncovering what people say they do. And of course, one of my jobs was working at home for 9 years, so I know how hard it is to focus on your work and get into that routine. There's no doubt about it. All the data suggests that people, when they're working from home, are doing other things. Doesn't mean they're not offsetting it with a lot longer hours and making up for the work, and they can claim to be just as productive as they are at the office. But the fact is, there's lots of personal activity at home. We know that the hybrid people are the least loyal. In fact, they're definitely going to be leaving their company in the next 5 years, and that's something that employers have to note. And the people that are working from home as well are a little less loyal. We're going to see in the next slide that that's probably because they have time to go look for a job. They're absolutely the hybrid employees. 47% are looking for a new job. And, you know, I'm looking at hybrid employees that I work with every day, and they come into the office for a couple days, everything smiles and happy, but then they go home, and now I'm starting to think, are they part of that 47% that are, looking for that next opportunity? So the loyalty, the job searching, all that suggests to me that your best employees are going to be the ones that you're seeing and working with in the office every day. And we got to get those employees back in the office for the productivity of the company. So I think data like this suggests the return to the office is going to happen sooner than later. And the traffic data that we're going to look at in future sections of the presentation should indicate that as well, as will what we've seen over the past several months with our growth rates back in the office. So that's what we're going to do in the next section. We're going to talk to a partner of ours called Placer.ai, and we're going to look at how they measure their actual foot traffic back into the office towers that Captivate is part of and displaying our network in front of. And with that fast growing number of old faces and the new faces entering our offices each day, it's important for them to capture our daily traffic and help us report on our impressions. Proudly, Captivate's one of the best and certainly a leader in that space. We use manual enumeration to count people. We use Wi-Fi sensors to count people. We use the mobile location data to count people. And that kind of hybrid model has really been on the cutting edge of research over the past few years. And today we're going to discuss that location data specifically. So I'm going to turn it over to Stefan. He's going to show us how Placer's methodology works, and certainly the great technology and algorithms that they've built, as well as the artificial intelligence. And he'll turn it back over to me when he's done. So thanks, Stefan.
Thanks, Scott. And let's see. Thanks, Scott. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Great to be with you, and happy to dive into a little bit more about our partnership with Captivate and a little bit more about Placer and what it is we do and how we do it. So you can read the long form version here, but the simple way to think about it is that Placer aggregates anonymized mobile location data from tens of millions of devices that we get from partnering with hundreds of different app publishers. So when you're using your dating app, your jogging app, your shopping app, and you share your location, you opt in order to have it be part of a market research panel. We are one of those market research panels. And so what we do is we use a similar process to any sort of other statistical sampling, even the census or political polls, to basically normalize and then extrapolate that subset of panel data, and then translate it into insights that relate to what's going on in the actual entirety of the population. And so what that kind of manifests itself as is a really robust set of data analytics that aren't stuffed in the bottom of a hard drive somewhere in your data scientist's office, but rather easy to use really quickly, and in a point and click way within the Placer dashboard. So if you can go to the next slide, we can show you a little bit more about what that actually looks like. So these are just a handful of the sorts of things that you can actually uncover using Placer data. These are, let's say a dozen here, and like it says, there are dozens more and growing by the day. So one of the things that we do by observing these mobile devices, which once again is entirely anonymous and entirely opt-in, is we understand patterns of human movement between different places over time. So by observing that device, let's say over a 6, 12, 18-month period, we can understand that the device is commuting from point A, where it has slept 20 nights out of the past month, to point B, where it has commuted, into the office 20 days out of the past month. Just throwing numbers out there. Now, what that allows us to do is really become the next generation of how trade areas are defined and how deep the level of analysis you can get into about people that visit a location. So what you can see up here at the top left, our trade area analysis is really kind of the next generation of the 1-3-5 mile radius ring analysis that you might see lots of other demographic reports delivered in. And what we're doing is we're ignoring all the geographies which people are not actually coming from and going to grab those that might be even further away that actually represent than a visit by, the kind of person that you're running a report on. So, it's one thing if you're talking about the 7-Eleven on the corner, but think about Disneyland, think about hotels, think about convention centers, think about, businesses located in Midtown where people are coming from all over the tri-state area, and commuting in on a regular basis, right? So we're tracking, the patterns of those visitors over time and showing you how that's trending with daily granularity back to the beginning of 2017. So we have a healthy data history and a sample set that can isolate, what's happening now and compare that versus pre-COVID levels. An important thing to note here is that we can also, when we're talking about running reports, we're not just talking about an individual space or a building. We're talking about anywhere that you can outline on a 2D map. So whether that be a block or a zip code or a city or a building or a retail space inside of a shopping center, all of those things we can run reports on with industry-leading accuracy and precision. The kinds of things that also helps illuminate are, breaking apart the reliance on geographic proximity is, understanding the pattern of behavior of where that device actually visited in addition to home and work. So are people leaving home, stopping for a coffee, and then going into the office, or are they going straight in? What kind of commuting hubs are they using? That sort of a thing. And based on the home locations of those devices, we can append and enrich it with a ton of different demographic data. So this is all of the stuff that you might imagine, like age, sex, income levels, family composition, household types, all that sort of stuff. We also then do a crosscut of all those key characteristics in a segmentation analysis. And we can allow you, once again, to run these reports, understand who these people are, how they behave on all of your properties, on any property next door, and all of your competitor properties. So it's really, really helpful for retail clients, office building owners, folks like that want to understand, the full scope of human behavior as it relates to their properties. For a lot of our retail customers, it also extends into understanding how foot traffic is tracking and trending across all the different stores in a chain. Maybe it could be their chain, it could be a competitor. We also understanding down to the individual location level, what routes and paths people are taking to get there. And in urban environments, that also means looking at transit hubs, in different sorts of, other places like airports and train stations, et cetera. Now, it's great that we can look at individual locations, because what we can also do is we can roll those locations up to a chain level. So to the extent you have multi-location businesses, particularly retail, but it could be, other types of businesses as well. What that allows us to do is, do the store ranking and benchmarking that I mentioned earlier, but then also get a view into how market share is trending between different brands over time, and how consumer preferences may be changing. So go to the next slide. Okay, we can talk about how Captivate's putting that back into action, and we'll hand it back over to Scott.
Thanks, Stefan. Great data, great company, and certainly a great partner for Captivate. Let me expand a little bit more on the Placer data and specifically how we're using it throughout the pandemic. Before I do, though, on the next slide, let's take a look at a sample of the companies who are running campaigns on Captivate. And again, this is even before the folks are fully returned to the office. This just shows the power, really, of Captivate and the quality of the audience at Captivate. If you think about all these blue chip brands in all these industries, no matter the industry, no matter the product or the brand, if they want valuable consumers or business decision makers, they know where to go, which is Captivate. For many, the trust in Captivate is due to our great data. Whether we deliver 100 people, 1,000 people, or 1 million people, we effectively and efficiently reach the targets that these folks want. And we do it with a high share of voice and really almost an exclusive way during that workday and what we call the working day part. It certainly is unmatched, and we're proud to have so many partners like Placer and so many customers like these folks on the slide. And this will grow even more and more as we get more people returning to the office, but certainly excited to see this much action. On the next slide, we're going to take a look at the first way we use the Placer data, and that is certainly to measure the number of people in our footprint. So in this office chart, which represents over 1,000 office buildings, you can see that the return to the office tracking shows consistent growth all year long. In fact, it's grown 66% And there's a few bumps and jumps during the holidays and back to school and things like that. However, it's been pretty darn consistent over the whole year, 66% growth. This is so important because it addresses that perception versus reality that we talked about previously. People don't think that people are back in the office, but I'm telling them every single day, every single month, it's growing in a constant rate of growth here. So if we look at the advertisers that may have bought us in January, and let's say back in January we sold 10 million impressions. If they pre-purchase that campaign and it's running now, they're getting 60 million impressions. They're getting 6 times their investment. So it's a great opportunity to get in now before the full and the big increase continues over the next several months. So that's one way to look at the data. The other way is to look at every single location we have specifically. So we look at them, we look at every single day of the week and count the number of people, or Placer counts the number of people that are in that location. And when people request it, and they say, how does this traffic compare to last year? How many people is this? We provide that data to our clients. So these are 3 of the best buildings in the network when it comes to the return to office. They're around 80-90% full, which means return to normal for what it was pre-pandemically. Obviously, I'm highlighting these 3 for a reason. I know these are the best buildings, and I know, it makes us look good, but I'll admit the building right next door may be 20 to 30% return to office. The point is we can now identify each of those buildings, put them on a plan or take them off a plan based on our clients' needs and challenges and objectives. So it's not that any, building is great or not great. It's really meeting our objectives for the campaign, the impressions you want, and the types of people you're trying to target. And we can now do that thanks to the great Placer data that we have. The next slide really shows 3 different ways to optimize campaigns. First, I'll just highlight the heat map on the right. I mean, this is a heat map that shows the highest density neighborhoods and blocks really in Manhattan where people are returning to the office rather. So that's one way I wanted to highlight this slide, but more so I wanted to highlight the way we optimize campaigns. In this example, there's 3 ways. One is you can pick buildings that have the most traffic. So where the most bodies, where the most people. I don't care if it's a large building, small building, I just want the most people. The second scenario that a client may choose is give me the buildings that have the highest back to normal rate or return to office rate. So the 3 buildings I showed on the previous slide, 80%, 90%, those would absolutely make a plan for a customer that was looking for the highest return to office buildings. Then finally, the third way, clients may say, give me the buildings with the best growth rate. So show me the buildings that have the highest growth rate right now, because I want to help Captivate and the building welcome those employees back to the office. I want to be the first thing they see as they come make their business decisions or personal decisions or friendship decisions as people get back to the office. So certainly we can do any of these 3 and more. Well, no matter what you choose in terms of optimization, we're never going to under-deliver because this growth rate is happening and it's going up. We don't expect, and nor do I think any of you expect, any sort of downturn in the return to office. I think I'm not saying the virus is behind us by any stretch, but I know productivity matters, the economy matters. In fact, 2/3 of all economic activity in New York City happens in the offices in New York City. So it's a place that the country needs for the economy, and it's certainly something that we're not going to put back in the bottle anytime soon. So I want to thank everyone for joining. I want to certainly thank you for your time today. We're going to open it up for Q&A, so please, follow Lorenzo's instructions in the Q&A, and we'll be happy to join back in and answer any questions that you have. Thank you so much.
So I am happy to play moderator for the Q&A portion of today's presentation. We actually had a few questions that came through the chat window during the course of the presentation. So Scott and Stefan, I'll put you guys on rapid fire. Scott, the first couple are for you. The first question comes from, this is anonymous. Are you solely relying on visitation data from Placer to show what's happening in your buildings, or are there other sources of information you are pulling from to provide an accurate picture of the tenants that are in your buildings?
There's really so much more that we offer in terms of data. Every client is different in terms of what they're looking for. The Placer data is great to get down to a location level and identify the occupancy and the rate of return and all the things that I just mentioned, in addition to all the great demographic and other information that Stefan mentioned. But clients sometimes need to go even deeper, and we use partners on custom audiences. So if they have custom audiences or first-party audiences that they want us to deliver against, we match to those using other mobile location companies. We also have our own panel, which was highlighted in this presentation today on some of the anecdotal evidence and observational evidence. We also have partners in the major measurement field like ComScore that are measuring our audience and the impressions there. So really, Captivate's one of those companies that has something for everyone in terms of the way we report on audiences. And then finally, we have what we call a tenant database, which is a record of every single company in our buildings. So for companies that want to do account-based marketing, for companies that want to target by titles or certain company types. So there's really no end to the amount of targeting you can do at Captivate.
Great, thank you, Scott. Another question for you, Scott, that I can actually answer. Can you guarantee delivery of impressions by building if I have a custom venue list? The answer to that question is yes. We absolutely can and always do guarantee impressions on a campaign basis. Next question is for, looks like Stefan. The question is, do you have confidence in determining traffic in Captivate buildings versus street activity? What is the reliability of the data collected?
Buildings are a lot easier than being on the street, because on the street you have a lot of noise, and it really kind of depends on how you define the question, right? So like if someone goes inside a building and we're measuring a Captivate building and they're there for, they're going to the check-in desk, they're going up the elevator, they're sitting at a desk, we have an extremely high level of confidence, that someone has in fact entered the building. Now, if you were talking about the hot dog cart on the corner and someone's there for 20 seconds, did they stop at the hot dog cart? Did they not? How do you define that? It becomes a little bit more, of a back and forth discussion in order to scope out and confirm that the data is in fact what it is you need. But our algorithms, as it applies to these kind of environments with these sorts of high-rise buildings in particular, really don't present anything in the way of issues. Especially for folks that are seeing impressions of ads that are going up and traveling up and down the elevators.
Great, thank you, Stefan. Follow-up question for you. Do the traffic numbers over the last few months line up with state and federal restrictions being eased? Or actually, this might be for Scott, or are there other triggers causing people to come back to work?
Well, Scott probably knows a lot more than I do, but at least from, my perspective, generally, yes, although there is a bit of a lag. A regulation goes into place, a restriction gets lifted, businesses then need to react and then, come up with a strategy about what it is they're going to do and how responsive they'll be. So, I mean, those things certainly come into play, but also all sorts of other stuff that really is just indicative of human behavior, right? Like, is it a rainy, cold day outside, or is it a hot day without a cloud in the sky? Is it during the kids' summer break, or is it in September once everyone's back in school? There's lots of things that play into it. Also in what we saw in New York as well is that I live in the New York area. Anyone who is familiar with it knows that when the United Nations comes to town, the entire city is in gridlock and it's very difficult to get around town. So we did see that have some impact on foot traffic into some buildings and different types of businesses, not just office, but retail and stuff as well, because of just kind of the fear of traffic, that comes along with that event. But by and large, as kind of restrictions are lifted and people kind of begin to absorb that information, it sets kind of a keystone direction for which way we see people coming back in.
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally, the only thing I will add to that in terms of triggers, and Scott can back me up on this, is we expected to see and have seen a bump in traffic when schools reopened in September. We also expected to see a bump in traffic, and that's been realized with some of the mandates being put in some of our larger markets like New York and Los Angeles. And anecdotally, I can add, again, going back to the perception versus reality that we talked about earlier during the presentation, when you look at the markets that are impacted, the current state of the coronavirus pandemic is truly a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Where the issues are in terms of markets and states like Alaska, Tennessee, Mississippi, Louisiana, that's where the Delta variant is running rampant and where there's been impact on healthcare systems, et cetera. But when you look at the markets where Captivate is deployed and where we have the highest impression yields, markets like New York, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, there really hasn't been a tremendous impact to date on the Delta variant, where we're seeing the largest returns to work. I'll just continue going down. This is for, it says for Stefan and Scott. So Scott's probably more for you. How often are you updating this data? Which I can also answer. We're updating on a weekly basis. And we are publishing and making this data available to all of our partners on a weekly basis. We aggregate those weekly updates every single month. And we update our proposal tool as well as our programmatic platforms on a monthly basis, but this data gets updated every single week. And then last question, again, both addressed to Scott and Stefan. Can you provide any long-term projections or predictions on where we expect to end up with traffic levels for return to work by the end of the year?
I think I can take that, Lorenzo. And kind of my proof point is going to be that one chart that I showed where we looked at the beginning of the year in January, and then we looked at August, and there was a 66% increase in people in the office. That 66% increase was really, if you take out the holidays and the ups and downs, it was really a straight line. And if you follow that straight line and let the math do the predicting for you, it looks like we're going to be at 70% by the end of the year. Now, it could be plus or minus 5 or 10. I mean, who knows exactly, but I would follow that exact line and see where it takes us. And I believe it's going to take us to around 70%, maybe 75%.
We just had another question added to the chat, Scott. So this is also addressed to you. How long do you expect people to be working from home? Is the hybrid model indefinite, or do you see it easing up?
Well, if they saw my presentation today, they would change their minds on the hybrid approach, just to keep more loyal employees, keep them from job searching, and certainly keeping their personal activities down during working hours. But no, there's no doubt that there's going to be some employers that allow it for the long term. And, my guess would be at the most, it would be 1 day a week. We've seen some companies relax a little bit on Fridays, which, would be the only thing that I would see for kind of the future is maybe a summer Fridays all year long type thing. But that's anecdotal. It's nothing based on the data. Based on the data, it looks like getting people back in the office is the must have for companies that want to succeed.
Okay, thank you. Doesn't look like we have any additional questions in the chat window. So I think we're okay to wrap up at this point. On behalf of everyone at Captivate, Scott and Stefan, thank you both for making yourselves available and going through this fantastic data. For those of you that joined us today, appreciate your time. Thank you for being part of this presentation. If there are any questions regarding anything that we went through today, I encourage you to reach out to your Captivate representative, or you have via the invitation, you have both Scott and my contact information. Feel free to reach out to one of us directly as well. And as I mentioned a moment ago, we're